This episode is brought to you by SteelRoot, a national leader in helping companies meet cybersecurity compliance requirements and prepare for CMMC. Their experienced team of engineers and consultants assist organizations of all sizes to implement and manage IT systems that meet the technical requirements in DFARS and CMMC. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of 123 CMMC. My name is Dana Mantilia, and I will be your host. And our guest today is none only than the famous Amira Arman. Hi, Amira. How are you?
Hello.
How are you doing? Tell us a little bit about yourself. Anything new and exciting going on?
Oh, no. I mean, from a professional standpoint, we're all excited about the CMMC 2.0. Still active with the C3PO Stakeholder Forum, which is getting some traction. We're having, monthly meetings with the AB now, and just enjoying the holidays. My company has to get CMMC level 2 because we're a C3PIO. So this is my downtime to do all the yearly required cybersecurity, another risk assessment. I get to do a full self-assessment, a full policy review. It's fun. I feel everyone's pain, in other words.
Well, at least now when you go through it, you know what they're going to feel when they go through it. So yes. You do know their pain.
Yes.
All right. So today we have a good topic. We're going to talk about scope, which is a very important place to start with things. So our first question is, what are the types of assets considered in CMMC scoping?
Okay, so the DoD released scoping guidance finally. And I'm going to focus mostly on level 2 scope, which is the CUI scope. But there is a different scope for level 1. So for level 1, it's basically if you have a asset, which could be a device, a network, a building, an iPhone, a computer, a document, a person. Those are all considered assets. For level 1, it's just, does that asset have FCI? Right? It's in scope. If it doesn't have FCI, it's not in scope. Very, very simple, right? For level 2, they've broken it down into multiple categories, right? So we start with CUI asset, which is a person, a device, a network, a building that has controlled and classified information in it, or processing, or moving through it. And then the next type of asset is a customer risk managed asset, which is a asset that it's connected somehow to a CUI asset. It might be on the same network, it might be in the same building, it might walk through the space, right? But because of your procedures or your technical controls, it should not get CUI onto it. It should not come in contact with CUI. So an example is you might have a network where you have laptops that work with CUI. Those would be CUI assets. And then you're going to have the accountant's laptop with no CUI, right? The accountant should not be accessing that data. So that would be a contractor risk managed asset. Third category is a security protection asset, which is something that provides a security function for any of the other type of in-scope assets, even for those non-CUI assets. And then we have specialized assets, which there's several categories, but basically they come down to devices that are generally hard to secure fully because maybe they're operational technology, they're controlling machinery, or maybe they're a test system where, you literally can't apply all the security or else it'll break, or maybe they're a customer deliverable, right? The government has given you a system to work with, and you can't apply full security to it. So that's broken down into different smaller categories, but that's a specialized asset. So those are those are the main ones, and then we have the last one, which is out of scope, which is just according to the scoping guide, an asset that cannot process, store, or transmit CUI, which is kind of a hard way of looking at it.
All right, so then to drill down a little bit more, so what does it mean when the guide says that only the system security plan requirement will be assessed for certain assets?
Mm-hmm. So the way I understand that is, what everyone, when they look at the scoping guide, they go, oh, well, a third-party assessment, or a scored assessment is only going to be applicable for CUI assets and security protection assets. The other categories, the specialized assets, the customer risk managed assets, they don't get scored. You can't fail your CMMC assessment based on them. So that's nice, right? Yay, easy button, right? We don't need to secure those potentially, right? We're not going to fail because of them. But the scoping guide says you have to do the control related to the system security plan for them. And what that means is in your system security plan, you're going to have those 110 CMMC practices, right? It has to have complex passwords. It has to have account lockout. And even if that type of asset you have isn't scoreable, it's a contractor risk managed asset, you should still describe how you do each of those 110 practices for that asset. So that's still a lot of documentation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, so you don't have to assess everything inside your boundaries. Yes, no.
Kind of. So you're supposed to, some of the controls in CMMC say to self-assess or review the performance of the controls against your environment, right? Make sure that stuff is really keeping you secure, it's functional. And that is something that you're going to be doing across your entire environment. When it says contractor risk managed asset, it means that you are supposed to manage risk. That means you have to review those assets and think of ways that they could harm you. Maybe they're very easy to attack using email, so maybe you ought to add email protection. But in terms of passing or failing your CMMC assessment, when it comes to either a self-assessment or a third-party assessment where you get scored or practices are met or not met, only the CUI assets and the security protection assets will cause you to not meet a practice.
Okay.
Vulnerabilities remediated. Businesses today face a number of cybersecurity challenges, from compliance requirements and third-party risk to skilled resource shortages, ransomware, and alert fatigue. At Vulnera, we recognize these challenges and offer solutions to do the heavy lifting. Vulnera empowers organizations with security solutions that perform continuous asset discovery, vulnerability assessments, and remediation validation in a single pane of glass, so your team can focus precious time on what matters: remediation. Vulnera.com. Vulnerabilities remediated.
So how can you skip assessing insecure assets? Or can you?
Well, the normal strategy certainly applies. If it does not have CUI on it, then try and put it into a different network or separate location from your CUI stuff, right? Put it put it in a different boundary, separate it out somehow. That's the best thing you can do. Now, if it's a CUI asset and you're struggling to secure it, that's when you start really looking at those specialized asset categories, right? Does this fit into a test system? Does it fit into operational technology, right? And if it does, I think that the government would want you to put it into those categories. Now, if it doesn't fit into one of those categories, now we're looking at, okay, it's got CUI, it doesn't fit into a specialized asset category. I can't say it's out of scope, or I can't put it into a different network because it's CUI, but I can't secure it, right? That's a rough situation. That's when you should start looking at alternative implementations. This is stuff like maybe you put it behind a very stringent firewall, or you use a different type of security that you can apply to it. And for those, you need to, according to the DFARS 252/204/7012 regulation, you need to email DoD CIO and ask them for permission, which is not that hard to do. It really isn't. But that's the last way I'd recommend. And that's not even skipping assessing. So to skip assessing, it's one of those first two: move it out of scope or put it into a category that doesn't get assessed.
Okay, so it's a little complicated for people. So let's talk about your expertise. And can you give any advice or tips about boundaries and setting up some kind of segmentation for some of this stuff?
I'm sorry, guys. I'm very technical. I'll try and bring it down a level. So boundaries can be many, many things. You can have physical boundaries like locked doors, occluding windows so that people can't see through them. You can even, unplug cables that might go outside your building. That's physical stuff. Logical boundaries are things like having good passwords, a firewall with deny by default rules. You can even set up like smaller boundaries that most people just think, oh, a firewall is a boundary, right? But you can layer on defenses, like telling your employees, don't take any documents outside the building, right? That's an administrative boundary. Or posting signs, CUI cannot leave this room, right? Or don't bring CUI into the visitor area. That's an administrative boundary. So I'd start brainstorming all the ways that you can layer on boundaries to keep CUI in, the designated area and keep other systems from getting access to it. And just, be creative. Start listing out all the ways and thinking about your risks. Risk assessment is a key part of CMMC, and coming up with ideas. Okay, here's a risk. We're getting phishing emails or whatnot. That's generally the number one, right? You can start going, okay, well, let's address that risk and lower that threat. And that might be an email specific type of boundary, like a data loss protection filter. So there's lots of options there.
And I do think I always suggest to people that they start with the physical boundaries, because that's a couple of good, easy, positive wins that everybody can relate to. A locked door, everybody can relate to covering a window, and you can understand all that kind of stuff, putting signs up. And by doing that, you're accomplishing a couple of these, it's like, okay, yes, we did that, because that's what we need to do, is give people hope that they can do this. So once they get the physical part down and they're like, okay, we did that, then when they go to work towards the digital aspect of things, they at least have a little bit more confidence than they did looking at this whole thing from the very beginning. So
One of my rules of thumb on that is when we're talking about physical barriers, it needs to be something that a unauthorized person would need to break to get in. So it doesn't need to be, a metal reinforced door with armed guards. It just needs to have to be broken to get in, right? That's the minimum threshold, which is it's a much easier bar to beat.
Okay, well, that's a good one. If it's not broken, then it should be doing what it's doing.
Almost all people are unwilling to break something, right? You could have somebody walk into a building by just opening the door. They'll be like, yeah, I got lost, right? But if they have to break it, that means they're predetermined.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good way to look at it. Okay, how does the scoping guide define what is in scope?
So when we reverse it, what is out of scope? It is assets that cannot process, store, or transmit CUI, which is super confusing to me because what is that? Like my friend's computer could process or store or transmit CUI, right? The government's computers definitely store and process CUI. My, a partner company, they've got CUI in their systems, right? So does that mean that all of that is in scope to me? Very, very confusing, and I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe a rock can't store, process, or transmit CUI. But then I'm like, well, we could get a pencil out and draw on the rock, right? And now, oh my goodness, it's in scope, right? So that definition in the scoping guide makes me crazy. And what I recommend trying to think about is the purpose of this is to keep your CUI, which you got as part of a government contract. The idea is keeping it inside of your scope, right? Inside of your systems, or between your systems and authorized other systems. So when you're defining what's out of scope, it's basically, have you prevented that system, that asset, that out of scope thing from getting your CUI in some way, right? And your CUI specifically means CUI that was provided to you as part of a contract or generated by you as part of a contract. And I think that kind of fleshes it out and makes it make a little bit more sense.
All right, so then that's our next question is, so should we start with looking at this first? You're saying start with, let's look at what's out of scope.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I guess I answered the questions out of order, but what is in scope? Start with your systems that have CUI, and then figure out what's connected to them in some way, right? And that's generally what is going to be where you start from in scope, and then you figure out what's out of scope next.
Okay. Well, this was all very, very helpful. Is there anything else you want to throw out there to kind of help demystify?
Well, for the last week or so, I've been putting out CMMC scoping practice scenarios, which they're not easy, right? They're stuff like how does scoping factor into virtualization? When you've got a CUI file server on a virtual host, right? What is that virtual host? Is it a CUI asset? Is it a security protection, right? Good question, right? So we need to think about it. My website, cmmcaudit.org, I've updated the scoping articles on there with those practice scenarios for people to learn on.
Yeah, that's a good website too. You have a lot of good stuff on there. So we definitely recommend that people go and check that out.
Cool. Thank you.
All All right, good stuff. Well, thank you so much for your time and all your expertise and helping us walk down this scope alley. And I think that was very helpful with the way you kind of spelled out some of the stuff, because like I mentioned in the beginning, I think it's very overwhelming and sometimes people don't know where to start. So thank you for all that.
It's a pleasure as always. Thank you, Dana.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for watching. And we hope to see you on the next episode of 123 CMMC. Till then, bye-bye.